see everyone joining us.
Okay.
Usually takes a little bit for everyone to kind of join in and connect to audio. So I usually give everyone a couple seconds. Hello, everyone. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. I'm just going to get started with introductions, and then if other folks want to join, they can jump in. Thank you all for tuning into our program this morning on Stream Systems. We are excited to have Carl Schwartz from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here as our speaker. With all the rain this year, I think it's a great time to talk about our streams, and very appropriately, it is raining here in Syracuse today. My name is Camille Marca, and I'm the water and ecology educator with Cornell Cooperative Extension, Onondaga County. I'm just going to go over a couple quick things, and then I'll introduce Carl. We are using Zoom in webinar mode, so you're all muted, and just to kind of reduce all of the background noise. If at the end you'd like to ask a question using audio, you can click on the raise hand button and I can unmute you. You should be able to see and hear the presenter throughout. But if you experience any issues, just let me know in the chat and I will do my best to help you troubleshoot. We'll wait until the end for questions, but feel free to type in questions throughout the webinar into the chat or the Q&A function. And if you use the Q&A function, you can ask a question anonymously if you'd like to do that. I'll be monitoring both of those for when we get to the end. Just to quickly introduce Cornell Cooperative Extension to those of you who aren't familiar, we are part of the nationwide extension system, which in New York State is run through Cornell University. We have a presence in every county in New York State, and we share research-based information to help local communities. We have many different program areas and topics that we cover educationally. Locally here in Onondaga County, we have 4-H and agriculture, nutrition, horticulture, which is our master gardeners, and natural resources. I work specifically as part of the Skaneateles Lake education program, which is funded by the city of Syracuse to provide education to help protect the water quality of Skaneateles Lake. And we do this through offering trainings and programs like this one, providing resources, sending updates about lake and water quality happenings through our newsletters, our social media. And if you haven't checked out the website for Skaneateles Lake, you can visit scanlakeinfo.org, and we are constantly and regularly updating that. So that's all from me. So I'm going to introduce our speaker today, Carl Schwartz. Carl has worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for over 40 years in multiple locations in the Northeast. He has degrees from Colorado State University and Pennsylvania State University, along with numerous training courses. Along with numerous training courses. For the last 30 years, he has been the state coordinator for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program and has completed hundreds of stream, wetland, and upland projects throughout New York State. He also serves as an instructor for courses offered by the Fish and Wildlife Service and has garnered numerous awards from non-governmental organizations as well as the Fish and Wildlife Service. So thank you very much, Carl, and I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here on a very fine day in October. I'm going to start with, in the big picture, the water we get in this area about 40 inches of precipitation a year. So when it falls, partly as rain and partly as snow and melts off. When it lands on the tops of the hills, it usually sits in a little bit of a wetland or a little flat area for only a few feet, maybe up to 300 feet or so, before it starts to form little rivulets and starts to come downhill. And then as it comes downhill, those steep drainages are a high energy erosive system. And then they come downhill and bring their sediment with them. And then that is transported into the flatter valley areas that have a different stream types. So it's important to actually consider the different types of streams, whether it's a steep stream. Steep in stream language is like 2%, where it dissipates energy by a series of plunge pools, or in a flatter less than 1%, where it's more sinuous and it has to meander. The flatter it gets, the more sinuosity it has to have in order to dissipate its energy. This particular stream is a stream up in the Adirondacks about a week after Hurricane Irene hit. So they got 13 inches of precipitation in 24 hours on this particular stream. And what you can see is a little bit of high flow debris that was caught by some of this vegetation on the banks, but otherwise the stream system is pretty much like it was the day before Irene hit. So a natural system can take a very large discharge as long as it has access to a little bit of a floodplain and remain the same. There's an example of a stream out in Colorado that a flood burst and gave the equivalent of a 10,000 year event, that the day after it was exactly the same as it was the day before, because it had a floodplain in order to dissipate that energy. But the stream itself remained exactly the same. So let's see, where my little signs go here. Another important thing to remember is as the stream and the water moves, and water is heavy, it's about a little over 40 pounds per cubic foot. So that's like carrying a concrete block around in a cubic foot, or like carrying a 5-gallon pail of oil or something is the same weight, pretty close to what a cubic foot of water is. And people don't really appreciate how heavy and how much force that is. When Irene hit in the Susquehanna River, the discharge at Waverly, where it went into Pennsylvania, was 120,000 cubic feet per second. So that is to put that in one spot, you'd have to have a hole 100 feet deep and over 1,000 feet wide every second. So there's a massive amount of force and a massive amount of volume of water being transported. And it's more important to think of not just the water that's being transported, but the sediment that goes with it. Once a stream reaches a close to Bankful event, then the transportation of sediment, the bed load, the banks and the streams start to move. And that's when, after a big rainfall, you see all the muddy water going down the river. Much of that sediment is the result of sediment transport on the bed and banks of a system. The other thing to keep in mind is that on this chart, you can see that the coarse material is moved in the higher velocity areas of the stream channel, and the fines are actually deposited on the inside of the meander. So this force is actually the same as a car going around a NAS track race course. It's centrifugal force. The velocity and the force of that water and that flow is on the outside of that bend. And on the inside, it's actually depositional. It doesn't have enough energy to move that sediment on the inside of that meander, but it can scour the outside of that meander. So if you're building a house, try to keep it on the inside of the meander, and you won't have nearly as many problems as you would be if you lived right perched on the outside of that meander. The other, people sometimes think that this gravel bar, commonly called, it's a point bar, is pushing the stream over. It's actually the reverse of that, is that the stream is depositing that bar because it doesn't have enough energy to move it on the inside of that meander, but it has enough energy to move very coarse material around the outside of that meander. And the high velocity is in these portions of the channel, and the low velocity is on the inside. So as the race car comes around that outside, that's why they're going high on the outside of the bend. But it's hard on the inside of that bend to keep your tires stuck to the inside of that bend. So you have to slow down. And so the river is doing the same thing. It has to slow down and deposits that fine material. So out here, it might have enough force to move a rock that's 2 feet around. And over here, it can't move fine sand. So it's important to just understand the physics of what's happening, because these are issues that need to be dealt with while you're working around streams. And you can see this in a natural system, how the stream on a flatter slope will meander down through the valley, and it will deposit on the inside of the meander, and it will scour on the outside of the meander. Now, some of that outside meander is a natural process that's downstream meander migration. And it's really not a large amount of erosion. However, if there's something that messes with the river upstream or downstream, there can be massive amounts of man-induced erosion on the outside of those meanders. And the reason is that if you try to make water run in a straight line and on a flat slope, the physics are against you. It can't do that. It has to meander to the outside of that. And so the more you try to make it straight, the more it will meander to the outside and scour the outside and take that material and deposit on the inside, and move the whole channel on its own. So there are some measurements that go with that. There's the belt width is where you measure outside of meander to outside of meander, and the meander width and channel length runs through the Towwood, which is the deepest part of the channel, coming down through that meander. So what we try to do when working with streams is try to find 2 wavelengths of a meander or a reach in a steeper stream that is not out of line with what it's supposed to be doing and seems to be relatively stable. So there's not a massive amount of erosion on the outside bend. There's not a bar that has a diagonal going through it that would show that the stream is trying to increase its sinuosity, and measure a series of measurements from this shape, and then transpose those measurements on the stream system that you're trying to work with. So a lot of the measurements in the stream world are based on bankful width. Bankful width in a stream is the incipient point of flooding. It's just before that river comes out onto the floodplain. And the reason that's so important is that's the maximum stress on the bed and banks of that system. As soon as it breaks out onto the floodplain, it takes that stress off. It's like unloosening your belt after Thanksgiving meal. It takes a lot of pressure off. And so it's depositional once it gets out onto the floodplain, but it's scour, and it develops a width, a depth, and a sinuosity and a longitudinal profile, pools, riffles, runs and glides as it goes down valley. So all of those are formed in relationship to the Bankful width. And when the water is lower, you can measure it because Bankful is actually a depositional feature. So you can see a little flat depositional feature that you can call Bankful, and you measure that from one side to the other. So all of your numbers are related to Bankful when you're working with the stream system. Now, we have tried for centuries, actually, to try to make streams get out of the way of where we want to develop. And this is a channel in the state of Washington that the Corps put in a number of years ago to move the stream out of the way so that the valley could be better developed for their purposes. And what happens is this is that nice straight channel. And the river, when it got to a flood stage, broke out of the berm that it was holding it in a very nice sinuous fashion as it went down through the valley, because that's what the stream has to do based on the laws of physics. So it's important to incorporate that in your planning or in your location of what's going on. And what people don't really appreciate is that the solution to this isn't really to raise the berms up higher, because when this is designed for a certain event, which may only occur once every 1% of the time, it doesn't have enough energy to move the sediment through in less time than that, so that it fills in and it grades, so it doesn't have the same capacity that it was designed to, and built for. And people claim that, well, that was designed for a certain storm, but the storm event was bigger than what it was designed for. Well, if you were to go in there and try to clean it out the day before the storm hit, you would still have the same problems because it's bringing sediment into the system. The other thing is that people think if you dig the channel deeper, it'll have more capacity and more room to hold more water. Well, in a farm pond, that would work, but a farm pond isn't transporting sediment through the system. So a big stream is going to have a lot of sediment, and it can move more sediment in an hour than a whole team of bulldozers can move in a week or more. This is the Mississippi River in Illinois, and this is a series of locks and dams that it was built by the Corps in order to reduce flooding and improve transportation of barge traffic. This was the latest storm event. So for over 200 years, the Corps has been trying to keep the Mississippi in a width of this much. And as you can see, it didn't work last year, it didn't work the year before, and it won't work next year. It's not that with that much water, you can't put in that little bit of an opening and have all the other issues with it too. And they just keep trying, but it's not going to work again with the same kind of a mentality. This is a stream. What I'm trying to show here is that a stream coming down through that system, if you over widen the channel, it will deposit in the center of that and build a central bar. This central bar then that has the outside of that meander is scouring over here, but it's too wide, so it doesn't have enough energy to move this sediment down through here, so it deposits it. Then it splits and goes to both sides of the bank because it's too wide from here to here. The channel splits and scours on both banks and takes all that sediment downstream. So it's important to have the right size of the width and depth of that channel in order to keep that from happening. people have been trying for years and years to do that. So they put a check dam in. A check dam is going straight across this system. And it's doing the same thing. It's over widened. So this check dam holds the sediment behind the check dam. The stream then splits and goes to both sides of that check dam and erodes the banks on both sides. And it'll do that in just one particular storm. So it's a dam that goes straight across the channel will always have some sort of sediment brought in behind it and hold it there because it can't move it through the system. And that's why we use structures now that are angled on the outside and dipped in the center to allow for natural channel movement down through that system. The traditional approach has been rock and riprap on the outside of a stream meander. This particular one is actually down in Broome County, that it just got behind the riprap and took it out. Only this is the 4th time it's done that. So just lining the outside of the channel, but still trying to keep it in a straight line, a big storm is going to take it out, and it's going to take it out again next time because you're not doing anything to dissipate the energy. So as soon as if you get outflanked, it doesn't matter what you have on here, whether it's concrete blocks or sheet pile or big rocks or whatever it is. If you get outflanked, you're outflanked and the stream is going to get your bank. And there's always seems to be the next storm is just a little bit higher. This is another issue that's common in streams. That when this particular stream, this is what a number of years ago, and you can see the sinuosity as this stream goes down through a flat valley. And then there's a bridge here. And this was heavily pastured. And over the years, what the grazing on the banks have done is it has widened the channel and has caused this chute cutoff. It's actually an avulsion here that cuts this channel off and it makes it go straighter. But all of this sediment that's coming out of here and all of the sediment that's coming down here has to go downstream. So it's filling in the channel downstream and making the stream much wider, as well as changing the slope on the stream. So it's now a straight shot with higher velocity coming down this way than it is to dissipate that energy around the outside of that meander and stay within a narrow valley without nearly as much bank erosion. So thinking he's getting every blade of grass over here, he actually is losing land to his neighbor downstream. There have been other approaches for trying to protect the outside of the meanders. Here's the old metal drum approach of trying to protect here. One of the issues with this technique is it seems to work right here, and it's working perfectly actually, because the stream is now over here and it's not going down through here at all, which is another consideration of, just putting rock on the side of the bank. If the stream moves over, all you have is a kind of a monument to rock on the bank. The tire approach to try to keep the stream from eroding the bank over here. And then the General Motors riprap approach of trying to put as many car bodies on the side as you can get. Let's see. There was a question about how does clay move through on the system. The clay is actually more colloidal, and it's moving through in solution because it's such a fine particle. Everything and the bigger pieces are moving through what's called saltation, which is tumbling along the bottom. It's not actually picked up and moved. Now, the medium ones can actually be picked up and moved, but most of it is moved through saltation, which is tumbling from one to another, because what the river will do will flow over a rock, scour in front of it, and then move that rock down through the system. So but the real fine stuff is in suspension. It's not being moved by siltation. Oops, damn, didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do was go back to my screen. Where did it go? Hey, Camille, can you help where I put that thing?
Yeah, I think you might have to share your screen again. So go back to the Zoom and click the share screen. Yep.
There we go. Okay. What this shows is when people, this is obviously a railroad bridge, and they tried to make it wide enough to accommodate a high flow because it's such a low height. But when they over widen the channel fills in because it doesn't have enough energy to move that sediment through the system. So it deposits and causes a problem that they have to come in and clean it out because the channel was not sized correctly. And it's actually more expensive to build one too wide. So you can make it too wide that it doesn't get good sediment transport, or you can make it too narrow and it will blast through the bottom and scour and fill in upstream. So it's kind of like having it the porridge just the right temperature. Can't be too hot, can't be too cold. So in order to move things through the system, that's what you really need, is the right size. And this is what we're mostly using now for stream bank erosion on the outside of a meander. This is Towwood. So this is actually replicates an undercut bank for fish habitat on the outside, but it has a bit of a bankful bench over here, which is essentially a mini floodplain. The reason it's not right here, this is what the stream was doing, was it was scouring the toe of the slope, slumping down to making these slumps pretty close to the bankful elevation. And this was in the Adirondacks, so we had to get a permit from the Adirondack Park Agency, and they would only allow us at that time to do 100 feet. So we did 100 feet, and then we left 100 feet, and then we did another 100 feet. And they didn't understand what we were talking about for what Towwood was and how it looked. And they thought it was some kind of a structure that was similar to riprap. And after they came out and looked at this, now we can actually do the whole reach because they actually like this kind of technique. And what this does is it roughens the flow and dissipates energy and has some flow vectors that are off into the channel that dissipate energy and push the river away from the bank. And it looks a lot more natural than what I was showing you before with riprap. So let me go back and answer some questions.
I think you've covered all the questions that we have so far.
Okay. Well, does anybody have any other questions that I instigated?
Oh, it looks like John is raising his hand, so I will let him unmute if he wants to.
Sure.
So John,
Okay.
yeah,
Can you
John,
hear me?
jump in. Yep.
Yeah, my question was how it should be the right if you're constructing say a bridge, given the railroad bridge, you should allow for the right width of the stream. How would one calculate that? How would you determine that? ahead of time?
Okay, with the calculation that we use is the Bankful width, which was the incipient point to flooding. So the right size width, and that's why DEC now recommends like 1.5 times Bankful width. What we're looking, the reason for that is to accommodate a flood event. So if you have, so what we try to do is have the Bankful width of the bridge as a channel width, and then have a little bit of a bench to the side of that to accommodate the high flow flood width, or culverts off to the side of the bridge to drain the floodplain. Because what happens is upstream, the water has to wait to get through the opening if it's too small. So
Right.
makes a central bar, and then it scours downstream. Where if you have it too wide, then you get that deposition under the bridge, which is the worst
Right.
kind of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Anything else?
No.
Looks like Edward wants to talk, so I can unmute you, Edward, if you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, our situation is certainly in Skaneateles is these very steep grades, you know, shooting these down, and then they flatten out a little, and usually where they're flattening out, there's properties, and so now it's people are trying to channel it, and it may not be able to allow it to meander, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Thanks.
That's an excellent question. And the issue, that's right where it's coming down from a steep grade into a flatter slope. If people weren't living there, that would form an alluvial fan.
Yeah.
And that's a major issue. If it's an active alluvial fan, trying to make a main channel go through an active alluvial fan is pushing a rope uphill. It's very challenging. Really, it's actually impossible in an active fan, because anything on the upstream side of that fan can divert that flow from one side to the other. Just a log or a rock or getting in the wrong place will flip that flow, because you're looking at an inverted cone.
Yeah, and that seems to be the dynamic. And maybe 50 or 75 years ago, the events in the streams were much less dramatic, and now it's sort of overpowering everyone.
And that is exactly right. That's what has happened here. Is the Bankful dimensions don't change. Bankful is Bankful is Bankful, but the Bankful flow comes much more often than it used to, and every one of those events is moving that sediment. So I don't have a good solution for dealing with an alluvial fan, other than try to keep a step pool system where you have the slope to do that, and then let it be a combination of step pool and sinuosity in between, if you can get the right dimension to make that work on one side of the alluvial fan. To try to take it down the center of an alluvial fan is not very workable over a long period of time.
And so is the idea there, you're basically looking to dissipate energy?
Yes.
With those strategies?
Yes, you're trying to dissipate that energy, because the force is coming down from, you've got potential and kinetic energy. So when that rain hits the top of that hill outside Skaneateles Lake, it's got a lot of potential energy. And as it comes down that valley, it's got massive amount of kinetic energy. So if you don't try to dissipate that energy, whatever it hits, it's going to move, because there's just a tremendous amount of stream power coming down a steep slope. If you got 40 pounds of a cubic foot hitting, and it might be 10 cubic feet, and it hits every second, it's going to move whatever it hits dead on. So the other approach is to try to deflect some of that energy with barbs or vanes or something, in order to have that energy formed into the center of the channel rather than slamming into the bank. And you can do that on a steeper slope, or even on a flatter slope. You can use veins and cross veins, that kind of stuff, in order to try to dissipate that energy. But it's on a steeper slope, you can just use a series of plunge pools and step pools in order to move that energy and dissipate that energy from one pool to the next. So it's not just one big rush slope.
You can see in the streams that nature is actually forming those, kind of moving down the hill. Thanks.
Carl, can you define what an alluvial fan is for anyone who might not know?
An alluvial fan is where a stream starts at the top of a hillside, and then it's like a truck dumping a load of gravel. It forms a big cone as all that sediment comes down from the hill. So the cone is the sediment that's brought down from the stream as it cuts into the top of the hill and deposits on the side of the hill. And so the cone is shaped as a outside. So when the water hits the top of that cone, it can go in any direction from 180 degrees, depending on whatever's obstructing it at the top of that. It'll always look for the easiest way to get down through there. And I did a project on a stream one time that was because there was a culvert that was undersized, and it was causing a huge undercut of that culvert. And so what I did was invert the alluvial fan so that the water had to go down the channel that was created with the higher sides on the two sides, rather than allow it to go as a fan to the outside and go in any direction. And then put a series of step pools in there to dissipate that energy so that there was fish could get up through there and the energy would be dissipated. So that's an approach that can work in limited cases.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Oh, let's see. Frank says, can you note the strategy on alternating angled log step structures done on Dowling Creek as the update to check dam strategy as well?
Angled logs?
Yeah.
Yeah, the angled logs actually work pretty well. That's a rock and roll logs, they're sometimes called. And what you're doing is you're dissipating that energy from one side to the other over top of those logs. So it's the same approach as using step pools, but it's like a skier going down a steep slope. You're cutting your skis back and forth real quick, real fast. And then when you get to the flatter part of the slope, you can have a much more smooth, sinuous trip down the valley. The rock and roll logs will allow you to cut that channel back and forth real quickly to dissipate the energy and keep the energy in the center of the channel, not slamming into the bank. So it's a good technique.
Those are all the questions that I see right now. Frank says, thank you. Love the rock and roll term.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
I guess I do have a question if
Sure.
no one else does. What resources are out there for homeowners who, especially in southern Skaneateles this year, have experienced a ton of flooding on the streams in their backyards or that they live near? What resources are out there for homeowners who are kind of dealing with these situations?
What we do, well, with the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, what we have done a number of projects in Skaneateles Lake and the watershed to try to alleviate some of those issues. So we can come out and take a look. The issue is lining up the funds to be able to complete projects, and homeowners can kind of ask for technical assistance to see if there's a better approach or what can be done, because there are a lot of approaches now that weren't available maybe 20 years ago when people just tried to harden the bank, and then the water would deflect and split over to another channel. But we can help. Some other people can help, but we often get the calls because there's actually a lot of technical information that's needed to do the right thing. It's not something that just standard everyday high school education is able to deal with. And some things that people, when they look and they see what's going on, they don't understand it, because traditionally approaches were to put in single wing deflectors or something to try to angle downstream, thinking that you would move the water toward the center of the channel with those logs or rocks, whatever they used. And the answer is it did, but at high flow, it went across those and then into the bank, and it was counterproductive. So the other lesson there is whatever you do, it's important to monitor it and evaluate what you're doing and how well it's working, because you can always adjust things later on that may not work as well as what you thought. But if you just keep repeating the same mistake, you're making it harder for people who follow you.
So Frank is asking, can you know a bit about how soil and water conservation districts have played a complementary role to your work on these projects?
Yes, actually, we work with most of the soil and water districts in the state. So we routinely work with soil and water districts all over the state, and some of them are extremely helpful in trying to get to grants, or they work with local residents because they have contacts with the residents, or people will go to the soil and water districts first, and then they'll ask for if we have any ideas on it. So I would like to emphasize how important soil and water districts are for contacting with private landowners, and how they can help when they have grants and money available. They can help private landowners in some circumstances. So they are very important in the system. And other agencies too, even the Corps of Engineers, the Department of Environmental Conservation, all will try to be helpful and questions for what they see the issue of the stream being. And it's important to try to get the right answer and the right solution, because it's a complicated system. People just don't appreciate how much force there is with water and how many issues there are with it when you get a big event. In the summertime, when the waters are low and the streams are really clear and nothing's really happening, because the sediment isn't being transported at those low flows. It's a nice clear stream. But when you get a lot of rain, you get 3, 4, and 5 inches of rain in a few hours, and suddenly those rivers are up and roaring. And that's what people need to be looking at and paying attention when they're looking at where to put their house, is what does that nice little brook coming down the hillside look like when there's a lot of rain that follows.
Absolutely. Edward asks, can you put the resource that you mentioned in the chat? I think he's talking about the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program.
Yes.
So you're the best person to contact for that, right, Carl?
Yeah, you can, yeah, send it to, we have Jan Dedici and myself do most of the stream stuff in the state. So I would be the contact point for that. You send me an email, would be the easiest thing. And then we'll deal with it. It's, I'm not, we want to help, let's put it that way. However, we cover the state of New York. So it's, it can be a little hectic at times trying to meet the demand but it's not that we're not trying. And if we don't get back to you right away, we're not ignoring you. We just haven't gotten there yet. So that's, I know right now, Jan is down on a project on a little beaver kill, and he's working up on the Sable, and I've been over on the Batten kill, and then we've been working in Broome County, and we actually, the good news is that some of the DPWs and county and state DOTs have recognized the value of understanding how some of these functions work and are willing to work with us rather than try the traditional technique of just dredge it and riprap it. So that's things have moved a lot further along than it was 20 years ago when people didn't think any of these techniques had any value.
That's great to hear. I put your email in the chat, but I'll also send it to everyone with the follow-up too. So don't worry about that, everyone. Frank also asked, is there any federal funds on the way that would help your capacity to do more projects?
The answer is it depends. Boy, I hate to give that legal answer, but some funding we get is available on certain watershed areas. For example, there's some Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding is sometimes available for projects in the Skaneateles area, or the Chesapeake Bay funding, or the Delaware funding. So it's a watershed-based kind of thing. And technically, actually, the soil and water districts through the WQIP program can come up with funding probably quicker and more money available than what we have to cover the entire state. So the short answer is yes, we have some funding, but it's a trivial amount to what the need is.
Gotcha. Those are all the questions that I'm seeing right now.
Okay, how did we make out time-wise? Is there, I don't want to stretch into anybody's lunch hour.
No, we're doing good. So if anyone has any last questions, feel free to type them into the chat. I say Joy is saying, could you share a diagram of a watershed with plunge pools and meanders to get an idea of how they are spaced out?
Oh, okay. The answer is that they're spaced according to the slope of the channel. So the steeper the slope, the shorter the plunge pools are spaced. And the shallower, the flatter the slope, the further apart they're spaced. So what we measure is a longitudinal profile going down the center of the channel on a reference reach to try to figure out what that particular slope is on that channel in relation to make those step pools the correct length. And so there's not a one size fits all. It really depends on the slope of the stream. So what we compare is the water surface slope to the valley slope. And that gives us the reference of sinuosity. And it gives us the length of the pool in relation to the steepness of the hillside. So I can't say they should be 3 feet or they should be 6 feet or they should be 10 feet because it depends on the slope of the hillside.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Feel free to raise your hand, type it into the chat, use the Q&A. I'm not seeing anything. If that's all the questions that you all have, I guess we can wrap up a little bit early and let you guys all have lunch. I just want to thank you all for joining us today. A huge thank you to you, Carl, for sharing this informative talk. I'm going to send a follow-up email to everyone who registered with resources, and I'll also share an evaluation. Please complete the evaluation. It's really helpful for us to know what kinds of programs you're interested in, especially as we work to plan programs for next year. It lets me know when I meet with our funders from the city of Syracuse, kind of what you all are interested in. So yeah, thank you all again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and a wonderful week.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carl.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.